After working with segments and measuring segments, we learned that we can add segments together and find other measures of segments either by measuring or using algebra. Next, we're going to talk about an angle. And an angle has a symbol that looks like this. It's a little bit of a sideways L. If we define an angle is a figure formed by two rays with the same endpoint. Angles are very helpful when we're talking about range of motion in physical therapy, when we're trying to launch certain items, whether that's in the military or even in a science project as well. And angles are very helpful when we're building roads because they deal with the steep of the curves when we build them as well. So when we think about an angle, here are the parts to an angle. First of all, we have to have two rays. And these two rays have to be connected. And they're connected at this point down here. This point has a name. This point, where the two rays connect, is called the vertex. Now, in an angle also has two sides. So this ray is a side, and this ray is the other side. Now, rays can be formed by lines and segments as well. But this is how we can draw an angle. Now, angles have names, just like segments do. And they have to be named appropriately as well. So let's go ahead and draw an angle. And let's go ahead and have A as the vertex, B as a point up here on this ray, and C on this other ray. So the two rays that make the angle are AB and AC. These again are the sides. A is the vertex. And when we name the angle, we use the angle symbol that I showed you a moment ago, and we write angle BAC. Now the order matters because A is the vertex, and it must be in the middle of the angle name. Now this angle, there's only one angle here. We can also name it as angle CAB, but we can also name it as angle A because there's only one angle, and so we can name it with the vertex. Now, sometimes there's an angle inside of an angle, and so that can happen if we have multiple rays at the same vertex. So let's go ahead and make a second diagram with three rays at a vertex, and we'll name these points X, Y, Z, and W. So let's go ahead and name the angles. We'll start with this tiny one right here. So this angle would be angle X, Y, Z. We could also name it ZYX. A second angle is this other smaller angle right here. This is angle ZYW. There's a third angle, and that is this big angle all the way across. This would be angle XYW. So those are the three angles. Now, if I were to say angle Y, we would be really confused because there's actually three angle Ys. Because you know what? There are three angles with a Y for a vertex. So we'd throw up our hands and go, I don't know which angle Y you're talking about. Now, this is how we can name angles. When we name angles, we can use the points that make the angle themselves. And so we can give it a name based on those points, but we can also name it based on its measure. So if we see M angle, let's say XMN, this M stands for the measure of an angle, which means we're looking for a number answer, which means we've got to measure them just like a segment is measured in inches or feet or centimeters or even millimeters. So the angle, the measure of angle XMN might be something like 42 degrees. And this symbol right here is the degree symbol. Just like temperature has degrees. Now, when we measure angles, we measure them with a protractor, but also to measure angles with a protractor, we need to know the types of angles that we could be measuring. So let's talk about the types of angles that we could have. So types of angles, and there's 4 of them. And you might be very familiar with them already. The first type of angle we can have is called an acute angle. And these are angles that are less than 90 degrees. They're tiny. Kind of like that. Some of the ones we've drawn already. The second type of angle that we can have is called a right angle. These are angles equal to 90 degrees. And our thumb and our index finger makes a pretty good right angle, but we put a box inside of the angle to show that it is a right angle. We also have an obtuse angle, and these are angles that are greater than 90 degrees. Now there's other limits on these kinds of angles, and more about that in another course, but these are wider angles. And the fourth type of angle that we have is a straight angle. And a straight angle is equal to 180 degrees and form a line. Now, when we're working with a protractor, which is a tool to measure angles, we have to be able to use the numbers on that protractor based on what kind of angle we're dealing with. If we're dealing with an acute angle, there's a certain set of numbers that we're looking for because the angle has to measure between 0 and 90. So it's all about the opening that we happen to be dealing with. So the instrument that you see in front of you is indeed called a protractor. And when we measure angles, we have to start at this point right here. And notice that if we extend the protractor across, we're at 0 degrees. On really either side, what we have is we have opposite rays. Now, if I were to put a ray in here, let's say that this would go, we'll make it do something like so. And let's say that I want to measure angle MOP. So what I would do is I would say, okay, well, what is the measure of angle MOP? Well, this opening is small. It's less than 90. So because of that, I'm going to use the numbers on the inside of the protractor. And I'm going to get a measurement of around 65 degrees. Now, if we have an angle that is, for example, off to the side here, if we were to have an angle that looked like this, then what we need to do is we need to turn our protractor so 0 degrees is on either side, whether it's this one or whether it's on this one. And the vertex of the protractor, that point where point O is, needs to be on the vertex of the angle. So more about that soon. You'll be measuring some angles. But let's review one last thing. So let's go ahead and say we have these three nice straight segments. And we have a point up here, we'll call it R. We have a point here, we'll call it S, and we'll call this point down here T. I'm going to point to an angle, and I want you to think to yourself about how we would name the angle that I'm pointing to. We're going to start down here. So this angle down here, how would we name that angle? If you said angle T, you're right. But how about with 3 points? This angle is angle RTS. Let's do another one. Let's take a look at this angle to the right. This would be angle RST. One more. This angle up top. Angle SRT. Notice each of the ones that we just did have a unique vertex. That's an introduction to angles. We're going to measure some angles and talk about properties like the angle addition postulate in upcoming times.